I didn't come here to disappear. I was pretty much invisible already. The flat got too loud in the way that empty rooms do. Every pipe a throat, every radiator a mouth. I was 39 and already felt like a ghost haunting my own furniture. I'd done a dozen jobs that left no dent in the world. Warehouse picker, night shift at the printers, 5 long years repairing cash machines. Every pay slip felt like a receipt for time I'd never get back. No friends, no kids, no reason to stay. So when I saw the vague ad in the paper, I thought, why not? Temporary, seasonal assistant required. North Cliff Lighthouse. Solo position. No experience required. How hard could it be? Just a light on a cliff that needed winding and checking, and someone to swear at the wind on its behalf. At least out there I'll be lonely on purpose. I told the harbour master I didn't drink. A lie. That I was good with my hands. True. And that I could handle nights. Truer than I wanted it to be. He looked at me for a long time, like he was measuring silence on me, seeing if it would fit. You alright being on your own? He asked, then quickly. Not 'cause you're a woman. I mean, once you're out there, you're out there. There's no coming back until your time's up. Fog's worse this year. Claustrophobic. You'll taste it before you see it. He was right about that. Salt settles on your tongue out here, like dust on a shelf. Even with the door bolted and the windows latched, the brine finds its way in. Tiny white crusts forming in the corners of the lantern room. But there's something under that. The air tastes metallic too, like licking a coin or biting a split lip. The first night, I learned the staircase by touch because the power tripped the second I plugged the kettle in. The cast iron treads were cold enough to sting. The trick is to lead with your palm, not your fingers. Saves you from cuts and splinters. Halfway up, there's a postcard-sized window. You have to lean close to see through it. And if you press your cheek to the stone, it'll steal your heat like a debt collector. Now I keep real thermal gloves stashed everywhere, and a thermos of coffee on the shelf. Next to it sits a logbook, angry, cramped handwriting, stretching back decades from what looked like hundreds of keepers. The entries read like prayers. Wound at 9:05, cleaned mantle. Horn at 12:30, 1:30. Wind southwest, 18 knots. Fog persistent, fog persistent, fog persistent. There's a comfort in tasks that have edges. Check the bulbs, wind the clocks, clean the glass. When the lamp is lit and the lens begins its slow rotation, the whole room changes, as if the tower takes a breath and remembers why it was built. The brass warms. The glass blurs and clears, blurs and clears. Every 70 seconds the beam passes, and the world outside appears in a white slice, spray leaping from the black rock, the cliff path slick and mean. Onshore, the town is just a smudge of orange, the sodium lamps tucked into the fold of the headland. At first, I didn't care that I couldn't get back. I didn't want to go back. Out here, it's me, the machinery, and the sea making its long arguments against the cliff. Out here, no one makes you hurt. The horn is mounted lower, where the tower thickens like a throat. It isn't the cartoonish blare you hear in films. It's a deep animal note, more felt than heard. A pressure that rattles your ribs. When it goes, the glass trembles in its frame. The tea shivers in your mug, and you taste brass in your mouth. I sleep in the watchroom, on a cot older than my mum. Sleep is a generous word. The mattress has a ridge down the middle like a fence. I padded it with forgotten coats and flattened cushions from the room's only armchair. It's good enough. Better an uncomfortable bed here than an uncomfortable silence at home. I keep telling myself I came for the peace, but the peace here isn't quiet. The weather has teeth. The first week, I played games with myself to keep from thinking too loudly. I'd count the steps, 78 to the lantern room, if you skid the cracked one. I tried to drink my coffee before the next sweep of the light caught my face. I timed the horn blasts to the second, and reward myself with a biscuit when I hit 3 in a row. On the 5th night, I started hearing water where there wasn't any. Not the roar you'd expect from the sea. This was smaller, meaner. The sound a tap makes when you didn't turn it off quite enough. I hunted it with a torch, ear to the pipes, hands to the walls, following that thin silver noise down into the surface level where the stone smells like damp metal and mould. Dry. Everything was dry. But the sound threaded the night all the same. Just at the edge of thought. Like a song you hate stuck behind your teeth. I wrote it off as the wind working some loose sash. I logged it as if naming the thing would make it behave. 1010. Dripping noise. Source unclear. I was raised to be practical. To rely on myself. My father taught me to check the obvious things first. If a car won't start, jiggle the battery lead before you condemn the alternator. After the marriage ended, after I stopped answering messages that opened with, "Hey stranger," I started to measure my days in things I could fix. The light is good for that. If it doesn't turn, you wind. If it burns too low, you trim. If the horn fails, you pull the choke and try again until the note opens over the water like a door. Sometimes, between the horn blasts, something like quiet falls. You hear the tower settle, your blood in your ears, the sea rearranging stones below. Sometimes, if you let yourself, you can almost believe the fog is just weather. That it isn't watching back. On the 7th night, it came in thick. I tasted it on the stairs before I saw it. The air went soft and damp, my arms sugar-coated with salt. The lantern room fogged from the outside like a breath on glass. The beam pushed through and carved a tunnel of light in the murk. Everything beyond erased. The horn note wobbled, then steadied like a throat clearing. I don't scare easy, not bragging. You can teach fear to stand in the corner if you give it enough chores, but there's a kind of wrong that doesn't arrive with bangs and screams. It pads in, makes itself at home in the parts of your brain that keeps lists. It makes you doubt your own edges. Close to midnight, I was standing with my knuckles on the rail, watching the beam make its slow sweep, when I felt it. A change in the room that wasn't temperature or sound. A prickle at the nape, an itch in my teeth. That childhood sense that someone just said your name in a room you haven't entered yet. The light slid across the fog, and for a heartbeat the world sharpened like a knife on wet stone. The tunnel showed nothing but vapour and white noise. Particles racing like snow in a torch beam. The light moved on. The room exhaled. My shoulders loosened without permission. And somewhere below me, out on the galley in that thick white. Something tapped against the metal rail, sharp and deliberate. Not a bang, not a jump scare I probably deserved. 4 neat taps, patient as a metronome. I told myself it was grit or pebbles, maybe kicked up by the wind or flung against the rail from below. A stretch, but easier than admitting what it sounded like. I wrote none of it in the log. Instead I wrote the tasks, small anchors against large weather, cleaned prisms, checked bulb housing and backup wiring. Horn, 12 AM, 12:30 AM. Fog persistent. When you're alone long enough, your thoughts have your back. They say sensible things, sometimes. They keep their hands in their pockets. That night they were unusually kind to me. It's rocks, they said. It's wind. It's the tower stretching its bones. Nothing to do with you. I made another circuit of the stairs. Palms leading the way, the rails slick and honest under my skin. Back in the watch room, I tried to sleep. The padding giving me no relief from the thin mattress ridge digging into my spine. I listened for the drip that had now become a lullaby and found none. So I lay there, awake. The horn beat the hours like a slow heart, and the beam kept time on the walls. I told myself I'd check the lantern glazing in the morning. I told myself there was no below me, really. Only air and the black percussion of the sea. I told myself anything that might make the hair on my arms lie down. But the next pass of the light brought the same electric feeling along the back of my neck. And the pass after that brought the taps again, metallic, rattling up through the rail in my hands. 4. Exactly 4. Like an answer. I didn't touch the logbook after that. I stood with the beam at my shoulder, the horn rattling my ribs, the taste of brass in my mouth. Very quietly, I counted my breathing until dawn made a weak suggestion at the window. The fog didn't lift, it just pretended to be thinner when the morning could see it. When I finally unlatched the door and stepped out onto the gallery, water beaded on my eyelashes and salt stung a cut I don't remember earning. Down below, the rocks were greased black, kelp combed flat by the tide. The rail where the tapping had sounded was empty, slick with damp, wearing nothing but a skin of condensation and a dusting of salt, the way it always does. I told myself a new lie, that sleep, and only sleep, would fix this. That night, the foghorn felt heavier in my hands. The note went out over the water like a hand laid on a shoulder, and for the first time, when it died away, I listened not for silence, but for an answer. By the second week, I'd stopped marking the days properly. The logbook was supposed to keep me straight, but the handwriting had already started to slip. Neat rows turning into jagged scrolls. I'd catch myself writing the wrong hour or repeating the same line twice, as if time had folded in on itself. I tried to blame it on sleep, and the truth is, I wasn't sleeping. Not really. I'd shut my eyes and hear that rattle on the rail, feel the vibration in my bones, wait for it to come again. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't, which was worse. I thought I saw something stranger than the fog one early afternoon. A white bird on the gallery rail. Too bright against the mist. Very out of place. It tilted its head at me, sharp and knowing. It was the most unusual crow I'd ever seen. I tried to creep closer to get a better view, but it slipped back into the fog, as if it had never been there. I told myself it was exhaustion, but I kept waiting for it to come back. The fog never left. It thickened and thinned, like a long-drawn breath, but it never let go of the tower. During the day, it was a dull white sheet, the sea and sky erased. At night, it pressed close, blackening at the edges of the lamp's tunnel, and I swear it pulsed with the horn like a thing alive. I started keeping a second notebook, hidden under my cot. Not the official log, just scribbles of things I couldn't bring myself to record in neat ink in fear of being branded crazy. Tap, 4 times, 2:15 AM. Heard footsteps on the gallery. Checked. Empty. Foghorn vibrated before I touched the choke. Something whispered back. That last one I tried to cross out so hard the paper tore. The strangest part, I still did the work. Bulbs checked, glass cleaned, gears wound. I still boiled the kettle, still counted the steps, still rationed my biscuits like a kid saving sweets. But the edges of my world had started to blur. Sometimes I'd walk the stairs and find myself at the wrong level, unsure if I'd gone up or down. Sometimes I'd catch a reflection in the lantern's glass and think there was someone else in the room. On the 9th night, I saw them. Not clearly, not the way I wanted, just a smear of shape in the beam's sweep. But it wasn't a gull or spray or a shadow, it was taller, straighter, a human outline standing where no footing should exist. Just fog and air and the drop to the rocks. By the time the beam came round again, it was gone. I didn't log it. I barely trusted myself to think it. The next night, there were 3. They stood at different heights out in the fog. Far enough from the tower to make no sense, but close enough to see. Perfectly still. Perfectly wrong. My stomach turned like I was in free fall, but I couldn't move. I gripped the brass rail until my hands went white. When the beam passed again, it shifted. I couldn't be certain, but I'm sure it was a fraction nearer. I nearly choked myself on the foghorn cord trying to get the sound out fast enough. I prayed the monstrous noise would create sound waves powerful enough to disturb the uncanny patterns made by the fog and light. The note roared into the dark, shaking the tower. For a moment, I felt relief. Until all 3 figures lifted their heads at once, like the sound was calling them home. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. Every sweep of the light brought them back. Every blast of the horn seemed to tighten whatever tether was pulling them in. I sat with my back to the wall, mug of coffee clutched like a weapon, whispering bargains to myself. If they reach the glass, I'll run. If they step onto the gallery, I'll jump. If they make a sound out, I never finished that one. By dawn, they were gone. Through the night, they'd seemed to shift a little closer with each pass of the lantern, never quite reaching the tower, but always shrinking the distance. As the sun crept back into existence, they thinned and faded with the fog. And in their place, on the rail where they had been staring all night, the white crow perched again. He tilted his head, watched me in silence before vanishing back into the fog, as if it had been bearing witness this entire time. By the 3rd week, I'd stopped pretending this was routine. The tower ran on its own rhythm, light turning, horn groaning, gears ticking, but I was the one falling out of sync. My hands shook even when they weren't on the rail. My coffee tasted like brine. My own reflection in the lantern glass startled me more than once. The second notebook grew messy. Sentences trailed into nonsense. Words scrawled at angles I didn't remember writing. Pages smeared where my hand had sweated through the ink. One night, I woke with the pen still in my fist. A line etched over and over, and as it carved the paper, "They're closer." The fog pressed tighter, damp clinging to my clothes. The whole tower felt smaller. I paced the stairs to keep myself awake, but more than once I reached the landing and couldn't tell if I was climbing up or down. Once I circled and circled, breath ragged, until I realised I'd been walking past the same window slit for nearly half an hour. When I leaned out to check, there was nothing but blank fog, nothing except the faint scrape of something against the stone. I stopped opening the logbook entirely. What was the point of writing bulb checked or gear wound when the real notes were carved into my bones? The figures returned night after night. Each time the sun fell, they were back in the fog, always starting from the same impossible distance as if rewound by dawn. And each sweep of the lamp drew them forward again. The figures were no longer just outlines. On the 12th night, the beam caught a pale suggestion of faces, blurred, waterlogged, but watching. Their posture was wrong, heads too still, bodies leaning just enough to look like they were falling without ever touching the ground. Each sweep stole another fraction of a distance. I swore I saw breath pluming in the cold when the light brushed them. The horn betrayed me worst of all. I pulled the cord, and instead of repelling, the vibration came first, shivering through the rails, crawling up my chest, and then they shifted, all of them, as one, like the horn had given them permission. I stopped blasting it for a time, but the silence was worse. I could feel them waiting for it, like dogs starved for a whistle. That was the night the white crow came back. Not at dawn this time, but deep in the hours before morning. I found it sitting on the gallery rail, feathers glowing faint against the lamp's beam. It didn't caw, it didn't move. Just tilted its head at me, eyes as dark as the fog behind it. For a second, I thought if I leaned close enough, it would speak. I don't know why, but I whispered to it. I asked it what they wanted, asked it if it was here for me, asked it if I was supposed to keep the light burning or let it die. The crow blinked once, and then the fog swallowed it. By dawn, the figures had retreated again. The white crow returned with the morning too, perched on the rail like it owned the place. I'd started leaving scraps of bread for it. Offerings, maybe. I couldn't tell if it was an omen or a protector. But since the figures hadn't stepped onto the gallery itself, I let myself believe it was keeping them back. Hoping it was. But even after dawn, the rail seemed to hum faintly, like it had held on to something that wasn't mine. Not the horn this time, something else. I couldn't shake the sense the tower itself was carrying their presence forward, holding a trace of them that would only end once they were inside with me. By the 4th week, the tower didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed, or worse, shared. The air inside was never still. The walls had a pulse I could feel through my palms when I leaned against them. I'd wake choking on panic, certain something was in the room with me, a terror that makes you bite down on your own fist to keep quiet. My thoughts whispered that there was no need for silence, that I was alone. But the dread clawing at my chest told me better. That I was far from alone. I stopped pretending the figures came and went. They reset, yes, but the rail still hummed each morning, like it had carried something up from the fog. I knew they hadn't left at all, they were just waiting for a chance to start again. Every dawn felt like a reprieve I hadn't earned. There was no question of leaving. The tower sits on a rock cut off from the mainland. The supply boat long overdue. The cliff path drowned under fog. I tried the radio more than once, but the harbour master's voice never sounded surprised. Almost like he already knew what circled the lighthouse. Every call ending the same way. Him telling me to keep the lamp turning, then cutting the line. That's when the fear deepened. If he knew and still left me here, then what chance did I have? I thought about the coats I found on my first day, hanging forgotten in the watchroom, too many for one keeper. I wondered then why they were left behind. Now I think I know. I imagine their owners running down these same stairs, pressing the same rails, whispering the same promise to themselves, till the night took them too. The white crow came back every dawn without fail, eyes fixed on me while I placed bread on the rail. The first time it ate, I thought I'd imagined it. The second time, I watched crumbs tumble from its beak and scatter into the mist. I didn't know if I was bribing a guardian or feeding a harbinger. But either way, I couldn't stop. The ritual mattered to me now. If I kept the crow fed, maybe it kept the gallery safe. Maybe. But safe didn't last. On the 15th night, I heard them through the stairs. Not outside, not in the fog. Inside the tower's bones, as if the sound was being carried up the iron itself. My throat closed, my torch beam shook so hard I could hardly keep the light steady on the steps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where to? Down into the dark? Up to the lantern room with nowhere to hide? Air was damp and sour in my mouth. Nothing there, nothing but the faint echo of weight where no one should be. I pressed my ear to the rail, and the vibration that came back wasn't the steady thrum of machinery. It was a rhythm. 4 steps. A pause. 4 steps again. I ran the rest of the way down, heart punching against my ribs, half expecting to feel a hand close on my shoulder. Every time I stopped to listen, silence filled the gap. But when I touched the rail, always the rail, it carried the memory of footsteps that weren't mine. A memory you can't scrub out. The crow didn't appear that dawn. I left the bread anyway, hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The thought of losing even that thin comfort made my stomach hollow with dread. On the 17th night, the figures were so close I could see the glisten of water running from their hair. They leaned against the fog as if it were glass, pressing towards the tower. When the beam cut across them, their heads lifted in perfect unison. Not fast, not jerky, just a slow tilt, like they'd been waiting for me to look. My teeth ached from clenching, my breath tearing at my throat. The silence between the horn blasts felt like held breath. Mine or theirs, I couldn't tell. I kept thinking, if I breathe too loud, they'll hear. By the 20th night, I'd stopped writing completely. The notebook sat in the watchroom drawer. All I had left was muttered promises to myself. Stay awake, keep the light moving, feed the crow. Don't let the rail go quiet. Because when the rail finally goes still, I think it'll mean they've stepped inside. By the 5th week, I was barely human. My body ran on seconds of sleep stolen at the desk, head snapping up at the smallest creak. I tried everything, piling coats against the door, wedging tools through the handles, even dragging the cot across the floor as if flimsy metal could stop but moved in the fog. None of it helped. The tower was never mine, never safe. Nights had become something I dreaded with a sick, sinking weight in my chest. I would sit staring at the lamp, wondering what would happen if I simply let it go dark. If I killed the beam, the figures might lose their path, but ships out to sea would lose theirs too. How many sailors would wreck against the rocks if I chose myself over them? The thought made me sick, but the temptation stayed. The tower itself felt like a trap. Every wall pressed inward, every stair twisted tighter. I barely recognized my own voice when I muttered to myself, raw and rasping from nights without rest. Coffee did nothing. Fear had chewed straight through the caffeine, leaving me wired and hollow. The figures no longer waited in the fog. They had crept beyond their usual stopping point. They pressed right to the edge of the gallery, only a sweep of the lamp between us. When the beam moved on, they shifted forward, bodies leaning into the metal rail as if testing it, weight dragging against the iron. Their outlines were warped by the fog, faces pale and waterlogged, hair plastered against skulls, clothes hanging in strips that fluttered without wind. Their eyes glistened too dark, too steady, fixed on me no matter how the beam moved. And worse, I recognized them. The pale features, the soaked uniforms, the warped faces were the same as the staff photos still hanging in the watchroom. Men and women that should have been long gone now stood outside, dripping and silent, staring in. I could hear the scrape now, groaning as if the rail itself might give way. On the final sweep of the lamp before dawn, I saw them on the gallery itself, right outside the window. One had its hand pressed flat against the glass, water trailing down its fingers, while another hovered inches from the door handle. I pressed myself against the far wall, too terrified to move, lungs locked tight as if even breathing might draw them in. Every time the light passed, they froze again, mannequins posed by a cruel hand, and every time it moved on, they edged closer. The crow came later that morning. I left bread with shaking fingers, whispered bargains I barely understood. Protect me, keep them off the gallery, don't let them in. The bird never answered, only watching with that tilted head, feathers glowing too bright against the grey. The harbour master stopped answering my calls, just static now hissing in my ears. Sometimes I thought I heard voices under it, muffled and distant, like others calling from the fog. I snapped the radio off and shoved it in the drawer with the notebooks. When I did, a loose scrap fluttered free, torn from a page not written in my hand. The handwriting was tight, frantic. It read, "The sea needs to eat. The lighthouse is the plate. The foghorn is the dinner bell. These figures are..." The line ended jagged, ripped short. I stared at it until the words blurred. I know tonight's the night they'll get in. They want me to go with them, to feed the sea, or whatever waits inside it. I have two choices: accept my fate and join the others, or kill the light and doom the sailors who trust me to keep them safe. The fog is thick and the cliffs are unforgiving. Even a seasoned captain wouldn't stand a chance without this beam. The advert was honest about one thing. This job was only ever temporary. But it won't end with a contract. It ends with me. Hi everyone, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. It helps me keep the light burning and the stories coming. Here's tonight's random fun fact. Did you know crows can recognize human faces and even hold grudges? Scientists found that they'll remember someone who wronged them for years and even teach other crows who to avoid. So maybe leaving bread for that little white crow wasn't such a bad idea. Good night.